our land and pay our respects to elders past and present. I'm very pleased to have at least two of our three speakers here today and particularly the Minister for Transport and Planning, the Hon. Rita Saffioti, who's given us 2 hours of her time in a rather busy schedule, and Brad Pettit, who's the Greens spokesperson on transport and planning, or just transport?
Both, yes.
Both, okay. And next is Libby Mettam, who is not here, it seems. I've probably got a good hint that may not happen because she is down, a seat in the southwest is something that she's rather keen to make sure she gets returned on. And Mark McGowan was down there today, so she may not make it. If she does, she'll come running in. But I think we can have a very good discussion just with these two, and that's the way I see it. It's a funny election, isn't it? It's really about COVID, and we're not going to talk about COVID. We're going to talk about transport and planning, and hopefully can talk about not just election stuff, which is usually short term, but where's it all going? What do you want to see in the long term? And that's why I wrote this paper, to try and say, well, you know, some of these issues we have to just make sure we don't get in the way of what's obviously going to happen in the long term. And it is that kind of time in history where things are rapidly changing, and we need to be able to see where that's going and be part of that historical moment as we move away from fossil fuels and create a different kind of city and regional economy with wonderful opportunities for that in Western Australia. So the way I would like to do this is just to say, well, we've got various headings that I've set out in my paper, and just to immediately ask Rita and Brad, if I'm allowed to say that, we're amongst friends. By the way, Brad and Rita went to school together, so this is very much
like
a
Rollestone Primary School with it, right?
So before we start, you can tell your story about Brad, please.
Okay, well, Brad and I both grew up in Rollestone, and we went to Rollestone Primary School together, moved to the new Rollestone District High School together, then we moved down to Kelmscott Senior High School together, so we went to school together for 12 years. As I said, he got Citizenship Award. I got the Ducks Award at the end of Kelmscott. So, as I said, he's a nicer guy. And
She's a smart one. So, no, it's a long history, and who would have thought it leads to here. Talking about this moment, talking about transport.
Given that
Fair
Rollestone
enough.
wasn't really served very well with public transport at all.
No.
The one bus.
The what was it, 219?
219.
It come randomly about every hour and a half.
Yeah. And then one bus stop. Yeah.
So you've both been working ever since to try and bring a bus. Okay. Well, that's a good start, because I think we've all got our stories about public transport that didn't work too well in our history. Certainly I do. 40 years ago, it was trying to save the Fremantle Railway, which I'm very happy to say did happen, and we've been building and rebuilding and extending ever since. And let me say I'm very happy that Rita has been able to put enormous resources and energy into Metronet. We need to continue with this growth in rail, and where is it likely to go, and ask Rita to just tell us where she thinks it's heading, and my idea about the circle line that is in that document is what I see as being, certainly in the shorter term, something that ought to be happening, but lots of other things about country rail and mid-tier transit and so on as well. But just start with the Metronet.
Well, thank you. Can I thank you also acknowledge, Peter, your long history in supporting public transport and rail in WA, being at the forefront of the debate for so many years, and one of the people that stood up and really supported our projects, in particular the Mandurah rail line as well. So, and I think we need advocates like yourself over that period of time. When you're right, rail wasn't in fashion for a number of years, but what we're seeing nationally is more projects actually coming on board. I mean, you all know the Metronet story. It was a commitment we took to the last election, the election before that, and the election before that. And the task for us has been to deliver what we committed to. So when we won in 2017, it was a very ambitious agenda, but one that we sought about to deliver straight away. And the projects that we're delivering are a mixture of making sure that our urban development front has quality public transport from day one. And I think the Ellenbrook story is an example of where that rail line has been lagging, behind the development front for about 20 or 10 years at least. So it was really about looking at those new suburbs that had been zoned. And this is one of the discussions, I think, is that people think that, Yanship is only going to be zoned urban now because of the rail line. It's actually been zoned, and so there's development happening there now. So it's really making sure, for example, the rail line to Yanship is built as part of the development front, so people can make choices about living in new suburbs connected to rail lines. The commitments we've got, the extension of the rail line to Yanship, the extension of the rail line to Byford, again, a very significant growing suburb, and one that, again, needs public transport to ensure people can have the right connections. The Ellenbrook rail line, to be able to sign that contract and to deliver that was probably the proudest moment of my first 4 years because of the debate about that. But again, it's acknowledging that Ellenbrook is there. It's there, and it's got a lot of people there, plus there's a lot of communities on the way. The Ellenbrook rail line. Of course, we've got other commitments, and we'll talk about the Circle Line in a second, but for example, the new Bayswater station, the redevelopment there as a key junction for 3 rail lines. We've got the new Midland station. We've got level crossing removals too, which is again a part of how we make sure our rail lines, in particular in the middle ring, really reflect the modern needs, and that is taking away the level crossings and creating opportunities for urban revitalisation. We also made a decision in relation to our rail cars to try and have them manufactured here. And again, it's easy to talk about it now, but the task was enormous. So at the time of the election, we looked at committing to build the new rail cars for the Metronet expansion here in WA. When we won government, we looked at the existing A series, knowing that they're near the end of their life, and replacing the A series together with the Metronet trains, bundling that into a major railcar manufacturing package, plus the maintenance and going to the market. And we were really, I think, worked really hard to get that package done, and to have the railcar manufacturing facility being built out near Midland in Bellevue is really, really exciting. So, and that's going to see our rail cars manufactured here in WA. And of course, not only do we have to get all the radius or all the key lines in a sense complete, the Yanship line, we've got the Byford line, we've got new stations also on the Mandurah line like Lakelands and also Carnup. We've got new parking at Mandurah. We've committed new parking at Edgewater. Not only do we have to make, and of course the Ellenbrook rail line, and of course the Forestfield Airport Link was a project that we inherited in the sense the contract, but we've overseen the construction of the Forestfield Airport Link, the tunnel from Bayswater through to Forestfield, and that's been a significant project. A few issues along the way, but one that is nearing completion. So we've got those projects, but it's also that circle route that Peter outlined, and so we've started with the Thornley to Coburn connection. I was in that the Glen Iris tunnel the other day, which was quite interesting. That's the tunnel under the freeway which will now receive the Thornley Coburn line, and that is the start of the circle route. And I think as we move forward, we're going to look at the circle route, but also how we connect people to our train stations. And I think this is the discussion of the future will be the first mile, last mile concept, in particular how we make sure our train stations basically become transfer stations, but not always by car and not always by bus, but more by bikes and scooters and so forth, and really trying to get that intermodal, but not the traditional intermodal of bus or car and train, and bus and train, but more how we can accommodate people getting to the train station, having these as key hubs, and then facilitating that transfer. And so and of course the circle route and how that's delivered will continue to be something that we will look at. So it's a pretty exciting time, but our focus really has been to deliver the commitments that we made, to make sure we get those projects under delivery, and then we'll move forward. The other key part of Metronet is the planning around these stations. And we created a dedicated Metronet team to try and make sure we get better planning around our stations. And as I've said, I mean, we've got the Alkimos and Yanship stations, for example, are being designed as city stations. So with great connections, the car park not right adjacent to, but a bit further away to allow, some good commercial and residential developments nearby. So we're trying to design the stations a bit differently than the past. I know there's been some discussion about our stations, but they all do go through a design review process, and we welcome the comments about our stations because that is very different to the past too, where there was no design review process. So, the planning around the stations, that is still the next big part of the jigsaw puzzle that we're working on, and we need to deliver that too. And, if you look at the vision to me is a series of urban villages around train stations with great connectivity, and of course, fundamentally why public transport is so important. And, we talk about Rollestone, but we probably had the ability to borrow the parents' car and so forth, but other people don't have that. And it's about giving people opportunity to access other suburbs, work, employment, medical services. Having the ability to travel around the network is so important. And on that, we also committed, as part of this election campaign, the 2-zone fare cap, because I think there is a bit of a disincentive for people in the outer suburbs to travel over many zones because of the cost, and we really want, the prime aim is to get as many people on public transport as possible. I believe it's incredibly beneficial for the environment, for affordability, and for making people connected to the entire community. So we've been really busy. I mean, it hasn't been an easy task getting all those projects underway, but I'm really proud that we've done that, but there's a lot more to do, and this is just the stage one.
Brad?
Thank you. So maybe just in terms of, as I was actually joking to read it earlier, I mean, the reality is I actually agree with a huge amount of what Rita and her team have done. I think Metronet is actually a project that deserves congratulations. I think it was really essential for making sure those outer suburbs had access to decent public transport and we could get some decent planning in them. From a Greens perspective, and from my kind of perspective with a urban planning hat on, I think though that the danger of the current approach though is that focusing so heavily on extending existing lines, and also adding in a whole bunch of fare incentives out there. The danger is that if we don't, transport in its current form can actually be a sprawl enabler, and we're actually not creating the kind of urban form we want the city to be. You all know that Perth is one of the most sprawled cities on the planet in terms of population size. I was just rereading today that stat where in terms of our, we are almost in the top 50 in terms of our footprint as a city, but in terms of population, we don't even sit in the top 1,000. So we're very low density, very sprawled city. And I think we need to make sure that the kind of transport investment we're doing doesn't actually further encourage that. Actually, how do we actually use our transport system to get, and linking that with good land use planning to get people very connected. So to respond to Peter's initial part of his paper, yeah, Metronet's good, but it needs to be done in conjunction with good inner central core zone. So the central zone at the moment is getting other than the Thornley, that first part of that ring that's on the map. And I think it is really useful to go back to the 2013 kind of Metronet idea, which actually has that much stronger focus on those inner cores as well. Now, I don't know that Tom Griffiths is here who's the CEO of the Southwest Group. So one of the things that we've been doing with the Southwest Group of Council is actually starting to say, well, how can we actually make design in the inner link? 'Cause this probably comes back a bit later to something in Peter's paper where we're talking about trackless trams or light rail, but actually that investment in our city centre, so we can actually get uplift, get value uplift, get density uplift, get the kinds of urban form that we want to see in our middle suburbs. At the moment, we're largely getting, in terms of infill in those spaces, Not well connected transport is your classic quadruplexes and triplexes, which are just wiping out tree canopy but not giving us good density, and actually need a much more robust design with transit around nodes. In fact, I think you can actually largely leave your suburbs alone, keep them treed, but make sure you actually have much better, higher density, medium density, depending on the kind of node it is, nodes around those. I think that's the kind of planning link with our transport we need to do, and that's got to be very much in that in that central zone. And I guess that's the zone at the moment that hasn't been invested in. And I know government was hoping to do some work this term or starting to plan for that. That hasn't happened to the best of my knowledge around how that light rail link might be planned or how those circle routes might be planned. But I think that's got to be the priority for the next term of government, is actually how we start to do that. Because if it's just cheap fares and new transit on the edge, that's where people are going to keep going. And at the moment, I mean, the frustration for people who are building apartments, building medium density inner part of Perth generally is demand's not there. We're not getting. We'll come back to this on some other topics, but we are not getting people because it's cheap and easy. And what Perth does really well is sprawl. What we don't do really well is infill, and we've actually got to flip that if we're going to be a much more sustainable city. And I kind of frame this in very much in the decade ahead is actually about how we flip our city out and responding to climate change, responding to actually the kind of city that we want to be. And I think it's a much stronger pushback against business as usual, and there's been some really good changes that I think Labor Party have brought. I guess obviously my job as a Green in the Parliament and the upper house would be to just try and make them better.
Or criticise them.
Thanks for taking us down that redevelopment, re-urbanising track, because I wouldn't mind just getting a little bit of feedback on that. I want to talk about North Fremantle and that regeneration that's going to happen there over the next few decades. It's a massive site that will be reclaimed. But can I just ask Gary Baverstock first, because he's a developer who has been trying to get the redevelopment around the station in the Metronet system, finding it very, very hard. Do you want to just quickly have a go?
The next biggest barrier that I found in Swanbourne, it took me 6 years to get through our own development. And by the way, I'm not a developer, I'm an architect who develops.
Okay, that'll do.
So I'm not the same as most developers. I'm there to do something that adds value from an architecture and planning viewpoint, not necessarily just to make money. So that's the difference between me and most developers. There's an end game that's very important to me. The biggest barrier that I felt was NIMBYism, the resistance to change. And it's unbelievable. I've seen it, I'm involved in Bayswater, as you may know, and trying to make a difference in a small way out there. But they've got the same problem as we did in CUSP. The resistance to change, where people feel entitled for everything to stay the same. And trying to get the noisy minority, the laggards and the Luddites, to see reality, the world picture is bigger than them and their psychological disposition. And unfortunately they're loud and they influence so many people unnecessarily, and unfortunately the silent majority don't speak up, and that's why we always get these extremist views guiding policy instead of normal people doing normal things using normal intelligence. So that's still a battle that we've got on the plate at Swanbourne. I suspect all the way to Fremantle it's going to be an arm wrestle. I can see it coming, but and as Brad knows how hard it is to try and get anything in a place where you've got a lot of people behind it. It's still hard enough. And the third aspect is making sustainability viable. That is the challenge of the 21st century, and actually the fourth point I'd like to make, that is really number 3 on the agenda, trying to make something that's good, adding value, giving people what they want, responding to the market at a viable scenario, so it becomes an economic solution, not just for the short-term fix, but till the end of the century and beyond. And that means reducing carbon. I mean, if you're not reducing carbon, you're not economically viable as far as I'm concerned. And that's part of the equation that we really need to look at.
Yep.
And,
Okay. So I'll get Rita to respond, because the whole thing. I mean, Claremont has redeveloped massively around the station and sold well, Brad. You know, we do manage to sell some high density stuff. So how come that happens, and down the road Swanbourne nearly drives you bankrupt trying to get it through the council? Can't we get something better than that?
Well, it's a pretty broad question that you asked. I'll try and tackle it from a number of fronts, and then Brad can respond. But first of all, I've got to say that we have to be better at precinct planning, around in areas, so whether they're called villages, precincts, and what we're trying to do is really either through sort of the old MRA sort of schemes like Bayswater, or through our varying instruments through WAPC, is get much better at the precinct plan. Because I really believe that we have had so much focus on the individual development, we actually haven't focused enough about the entire precinct and how that all works together. And that's a big challenge when in relation to a number of different owners. But I do believe precinct planning is the way of the future, and that has to happen around our new train stations and revitalised train stations. I haven't really talked a lot about Victoria Park, but I see that as a massive opportunity in that we're committed to elevated rail through Victoria Park, removing 3 level crossings at Washpool Road, Oat Street and Min Street. Elevated rail creates a lot of public open space and opportunities to provide more community space, and also some redevelopments as well. So precinct planning is number one. The other key point, and I think we have changed it a bit, although you wouldn't believe it if you read some of the Western Suburbs newspapers, is that we have tried to not take the lazy approach to infill. And Brad touched upon it, we both touched upon it at a planning conference, where we used to see, and when they do come up we reject them, sort of blanket upzoning of the entire suburb. So basically the whole sort of everyone gets to subdivide, and I saw it when I was in opposition. It went through City of Swan. It was a blanket upzoning, so everything gets upzoned, or 80% of the suburb gets upzoned. No precincts, no support, and so we have 3 little district shopping centres in Balladura, and it would have been far smarter to have some uplift in density around those shopping centres and around some of the more public transport nodes. But there's a wholesale upzoning. That doesn't. But the thing is, that only creates angst after a lot of it's done, because then you realise there's no tree in the entire suburb and that there's lots of cars. So the impact of that entire upzoning isn't felt immediate. Whereas when you do a density approach, where you look at nodes and you have height maybe adjacent to a public transport node or shopping centre, you see that immediately. You see the height immediately. And so as a result, the impacts of a properly planned approach, and when we talk about some of the schemes that we sort of were involved in, Nedlands and Subiaco, for example, the original proposals had a lot of upzoning. We basically removed, I think in both, between 50 and 70% of the properties from any upzoning, but we concentrated on bigger, sort of more dense nodes. So I think that's been an issue. So there's been suburbs where everyone has, built three 3-bedroom villas, entire paving, and if you look at it, from an aerial perspective, you don't see one tree. And then people talk about the urban canopy now, but that was something that was allowed to happen, but it didn't actually create the angst because it didn't create any height. And it seems that height in particular creates angst. But the other thing is, when you get to a precinct planning, you can allow for the transition, which is really important. So you have maybe, a more significant development transitioning to your single res. And I think some of the decisions in the past, in particular in the northern suburbs, where they didn't do that, they didn't create that nodal and transition, did create a bit of angst. And legitimately, I think, because it wasn't, to me, proper planning. So that is fundamentally how we have to change. And government, I believe, needs to take a leadership role in preparing the plans and assisting in preparing the plans. One person said to me, we've moved from a sort of a plan-based planning system or a map-based planning system to a policy-led planning system. As a result, you're navigating through a series of policies, but you actually physically never get to see what the place should look like. But I mean, in relation to NIMBYism, my view is that we have to continue to talk to the whole community. And so, for example, in what we're trying to do is we've instituted, my MetroNet team, for example, will door knock, and I asked them to go and door knock before we proposed a project around the entire area, talk to people directly. We have groups that go out and do that now. We're trying to understand that you have to talk to the whole community. And that's very hard because people are time poor. We know everyone's going about their normal business. We're all time poor, and we're not, sometimes we're not interested until the thing's being built next to us. But it's really about trying to communicate effectively with the entire community. When I look at, for example, some of the proposals we've done, I hear comments said back to me about what people want. And I've seen the surveys, the amount of people who have responded to the surveys and what they've said. So I really think you have to try and talk to the whole community, and that's a challenge. But it's something that we need to do. In relation to also the whole issue of sprawl versus density and so forth, as I've said a number of times, there is a lot of land that's zoned urban out there. There is, and it's done before my time. I tell you that it's been done for decades, and I feel like there's sometimes a view, and Ellenbrook was the example, there was a debate on whether Ellenbrook should have been built at the time it did. But so as a result, they just left it alone and no one built any infrastructure to it. Well, you have to deal with reality. The reality is Ellenbrook is a thriving, very busy suburb that deserves public transport. So I think you have to acknowledge what, as I said, every planning minister inherits all the decisions of the past. No planning minister starts with a clean slate and says, how should we develop this place? But so you have to understand what you're inheriting, but try and move. I do think the issue of cost is a big one for us in relation to density and trying to encourage more in a sense, more sort of, well, not in a city, but medium city sort of living. So I think cost will continue to be an issue and how we can manage that. And the other key point, and I think Brad and I both agree on this too, is variety of homes, variety of sizes. And our medium density code, which is out there for consultation, I urge everyone to have a look at that. Again, we look at sustainability, we look at the footprint of our homes, and also, and I think in WA to be very careful, you can never say everyone should be living like this. But what we can do is create a variety of housing choice. Let people choose the type of homes they want. And I think some of the anecdotes I get from when there's good quality product, produced in suburbs along the Fremantle line or through Subiaco, is that many people who want to downsize in their suburb want a quality product they can downsize to. And that then leaves a bigger house for maybe a bigger family to transition to. So that variety of housing size is something I'm very supportive of, because we need to make that the norm. And people, we've all been a bit focused on the size of the homes, resale value and so forth, but what we really need to do is try and encourage the house variety. So I think Fremantle put forward the granny flat proposal, which we've incorporated. The medium density guidelines really look at enabling a variety of house sizes in a block, rather than just saying this is all you can do. And so the last point, which I'll make, is the aggregation of land to support smarter development too, because again, in many instances when you're trying to encourage real precinct planning point of view or good sort of housing choice, you're not stuck, but there's different blocks of land. So again, the medium density code is trying to encourage amalgamation of lands through some bonuses so you can get a better outcome. Because I think the bigger blocks do support a better medium density outcome rather than just the 3x2 villas. 3 on a block. So they're the challenges, but we are acknowledging them and we're trying to move through them. Sorry.
Very good.
Okay. Good luck on the agglomeration and land assembly. Giles Thompson, the back, and I
Yeah,
have been working for a few years on a project called Greening the Greyfields. The Greyfields, the middle suburbs. Because the brownfields we know what to do with. Mostly it's been redeveloping industrial sites, and they're big. They're one owner, so you can do a big project on it, like Subiaco and East Perth were. And on the fringes, there's usually one owner, big rural area that's rezoned, and you've got a big developer who rolls out the project homes. But the middle suburbs, lots and lots and lots of little owners, and how to bring them all together and make good density where you need it. That's hard, but that does require precinct commitment, as you say. Brad, you were going to add something on that?
Yeah, I mean, sorry, there's not much of a debate here. I'm agreeing a lot with what the Minister said. So, but
you're allowed to.
And I think it's all really sensible stuff. But just to go back to some Gary's points. I mean, I think it's what we're seeing in Claremont. And in fact, there are only, interestingly, and you want me to put more updated figures, but last time I checked, there were only 3 local governments that met their density targets, and they were Claremont, Belmont and Freo. And I think that's interesting. There's plenty of others who are a long way from doing that, and that many of those are in the western suburbs.
Cottesloe didn't make it.
No, Cottesloe didn't make it. No, they were way down. But I think it's a really interesting question here, because you're right. There is a lot of pushback, but there's also, we need to make the density reward for our communities, and I think this is actually one of the things that where government can play a more carrot and stick kind of approach, because at the moment, the truth of the matter is, as we saw in Freo, and we went through a fair bit of hell when we changed our planning scheme so we could get density. I mean, it was an absolute shit fight, excuse the language, but it was. I mean, it was, and I was kind of like. But there was no. But then our community rights said, "What's the reward for us?" Other than the fact there's going to be more people on the street, which I think is a reward in itself. But I actually think there should be. I think there will be a lot of logic in government saying, for those communities that are embracing density, doing the right thing, there are infrastructure investment rewards. This is where I come back to the transport question, saying if you actually do the density, you get the transport, and actually, because you've actually shown you're bringing the people. And you are going to start delivering those kinds of people. We already do it with roads. We kind of project where roads are going to be, and we build them so they're. And I think we need to start doing this with public transport as well, and actually making sure that we plan forward for that kind of thing. So I'm kind of. I mean, and Peter, your point around why is Claremont worked? I think we have an amazing part of that western suburbs. Partly Claremont was the one who did it. Is because they were willing to do density. People want to downsize into apartments. People do, especially in that area. And they want to downsize in their area. Yeah. They want to stay connected to their community. That's why projects like Gary's doing so important, because people don't want to have to move far away. And that offering that choice in every suburb and making that happen and rewarding the community, I think, is important.
Two aspects. So 80% stay at home and die. So people have got it wrong. Not everyone ends up in a nursing home. But also the lack of opportunity for young people.
That's exactly right.
Oh my God, the council cut out 6 one-bedroom units I put in, especially for people who wanted to buy a unit for their kids. They all got money. They would have sold like hotcakes. And that was going to add diversity to that area, instead of having just a monoculture of old people around Swanbourne Village. I mean, but it goes back to what the Minister says. Diversity, guidelines, and also some sort of amalgamation policy. I had some input on the Netherlands debacle recently, and I could see the blocks are too small. Everyone's fighting over a bone, basically. If the blocks were bigger, you could do something decent, and you get a different type of developer and builder and professional people involved. So amalgamations are very important, particularly in Cottesloe Beach. This is a typical example. We've got a whole lot of small owners at outrageous prices. Nothing's viable, and they just go around in circles arguing about planning schemes, when in actual fact, if you had amalgamations and some sort of policy that you weren't allowed to put a submission in unless you had so many square metres, for instance, would make a big difference in a lot of areas.
Well, the medium density code, which is out for comment, and so it has sort of more of a carrot approach rather than the stick, i.e. there's bonuses if the block sizes are over X. Can I also talk about the concepts about why there are some legitimate concerns sometimes in relation to densification, and that goes to things like public open space, places for kids to play and, or people to be out, and also the capacity of schools. And what we've seen in particular in some parts of in a sense, the inner inner ring, is that our schools, our public schools get very full. So one of the things we're looking at too is how can we support, like when there is like a densification or significant developments, how do we support expanding those schools and that public open space too? Because I think that's really important, because we've got greenfields in WA has been easy in a sense, because it's all done, in a sense, normally through one major property owner. But for example, I'll give you the example of East Wanneroo, which is a complex series of land holdings. There's been a discussion about rezoning or redevelopment for many, many years, for about 20 years. The state actually developed the structure plan for that. It's the first time that basically the state went in and actually did a structure plan. So to support a more precinct idea, stages of development, so you don't have the corner the most furthest away from all your sort of public transport and stuff developed first. You're actually doing it in stages of development. It also stops where, and this is a problem we have, in particular when there's fragmented ownership, and there's a lot of that now, that's where we're developing, is where, and it happens all the time. So developers go in by individual blocks, and then one developer starts a structure plan. And what you see is then, there's always a lot of discussion and community concern that it's actually one person who's gone in, the other developer's not involved. There's debate whether schools or the public open space should be, and all the genuine sharing of costs and sort of and infrastructure. So, and I think WA PC has a role, and the Department of Planning, Lands and Heritage has a role, and East Wanneroo has been the example where what we've done is develop a plan. Now, not everyone supports it, but it's a plan. It's staged development from the west to the east, acknowledging where the existing residential is, so it's staged, and it's not being proponent-led, where you have hops, like different developments happening everywhere, and no integration, of those sites. So I think that is also the way of the future, but it has been something that hasn't happened a lot because there's been a reluctance to have that being centrally led, but I do think it's something we need to look at, as more of our developments are not the massive developments like Ellenbrook, or it's actually now a lot of fragmented ownership, a lot of different owners at different stages of their life, and having to try and handle that in a sensitive way, but also one that the landowners can actually participate in.
Very good.
That's a very good point.
Yeah, thanks for that. Can I just switch to, I want to talk about North Fremantle, because that is involving these issues of redevelopment, regeneration, and it has been for many years a place that was decimated by the port when it expanded with containerisation, and half the population had to move out. Jerry McGill was one of the people that was left. Seems as though you've been there for about 100 years, but Jerry was on the local council, and for many years chair of the planning committee there, and been running the North Fremantle Community Association, and is very keen to see about the longer term future and how it can reclaim that future. Do you want to just tell us a bit about that and the issues of infrastructure and strategic planning that you're facing?
I just would like to point out that in the 50 years from 1971 to 2021, the Fremantle container trade expanded from 50,000 TEU to nearly 800,000 TEU. So that's a multiple of 16 times. So accommodating this, as Peter has mentioned, resulted in major changes to the built fabric of North Fremantle. In fact, the destruction of much of it. And the road and rail network. I've lived throughout most of this. I can testify that the community has never been consulted about it, and not a single social and environmental assessment has been made of any order. And if anyone wants to challenge me on that, I'll take it to the appropriate references. This actually goes some way to explaining the ire that has been experienced since the new crossing project was announced. In response, we were granted 2 forums, which, though very welcome, focused exclusively on the river and its immediate surrounds, and the technical issues raised thereby, neglecting completely the needs of the region and the communities the crossings are meant to serve. So, in the Minister's most interesting comments across the whole range of the planning issues involved, which I'm very happy to have heard them, because it's delightful to hear a planning minister speak with some vision and foresight on these issues. I'm actually looking for a job here. What's been, in fact, there are a couple of words of yours which went directly to my heart, and these were vision on the one hand and precinct planning on the other, because these are 2 things which are conspicuously absent in the Fremantle River Crossings project. And what's happened in the Fremantle River Crossings project is the absolute antithesis of those 2 notions. So, what my question is, which I'll now come to, is do you agree that the needs and aspirations of the communities affected deserve to be given equal weight to technical considerations from the earliest planning stages through to the completion of major infrastructure projects? And if so, how might this be ensured?
Okay.
Easy question.
Yeah. Well, the Fremantle Traffic Bridge is a bridge that has been discussed for many, many years, and so we were very fortunate to negotiate with Commonwealth Government to secure the funds for that bridge. As in the balance between the technical and, I suppose, the community aspirations, the bridge, as we know, has a series of constraints, and we can discuss the extent of those constraints and, probably later, but there's a number of constraints. And as in the level of difficulty, we've got the maritime, we've got the boats, we've got the bridge itself for the vehicles, we've got improved pedestrian and cycling benefits, which we're very keen to see. We've got the rail as well. All those things, and both passenger and freight. So there's a number of things that are in front of us. But we also understand that bridge needs to be replaced from ongoing safety and maintenance issues. So we understand that too. So what we designed is an alliance contract in relation to the bridge. So that is trying to marry the engine, and in that alliance contract we actually specified that we have people with architectural background or an architectural firm to be part of the alliance. So unlike other projects which are design and construct, which we design and then we hand over for construction, this is specified as an alliance contract. The reason being is we want the team to be sitting down and working out all the different options to deliver that outcome. So that is the process that's underway, and I think the reason why we chose the alliance process is we want a process where the team, with all the relevant people sitting around the table, can actually develop a project that works from an engineering point of view, can deliver all the different demands, and there are significant demands from the different users, or whether it be the maritime users, whether it be the cyclists, whether it be the pedestrians, whether it be the cars, whether it be the freight. And also acknowledging that we need to do that in a process that is where in a sense, the engineers, the architects, everyone's sitting around. And so that's why we've done that. In relation to, delivering infrastructure is hard, as you know. It's very hard. And we understand that this bridge is something that many people have discussed for many, many years. But because of that, that's why we created this type of procurement process to facilitate the actual successful proponent to have a look at all options to meet the demands or the requests from the community. I've been a little bit, I suppose, concerned about some of the comments made about it. You know, I think we've done everything we can so far. We've held forums, we're engaging with the community, but moreover, we've got a procurement process that facilitates a better design and a better delivered project. But it is a very difficult project to deliver. As I said, we're going to have to make sure we're the boat users, the pedestrians, the cyclists, the cars, the freight and the public transport network are all accommodated, and it is a very, very difficult project. But we specifically designed the procurement process acknowledging the difficulties and all that, and there is a design and there's an engineering process that's underway.
Right.
Where do I start? We've had lots of debates around this one. Look, I don't think Jerry knows my view as well, but I do think it's not often we build a new bridge across the Yarragon, the Swan River, and it's very much my view that you need to get these things right, and you don't just try and build a and I guess my critique of it is that what we were going towards, and I do acknowledge at the last minute there was a turning towards looking more options, but we're heading very quickly towards a main roads-led freeway design bridge that was pretty unremarkable in the wrong location, frankly. Pleased that now the Alliance at least has the option of looking at different alignments, because I think that would have been such a suboptimal outcome, because, I mean, not only a pretty unattractive bridge, it was a concrete standard bridge, but one that actually was going in the wrong direction, and closed around a whole bunch of opportunities. So, look, I don't want to bore people with acknowledging this. In some ways, it's a bit of a local project, but I think there is a key issue here is that, and I appreciate we have got a new design review process. My comment around that is we need to make sure with our transport projects that stuff happens early, and I think because there's a danger that we end up creating a new urban ugliness in this state, because we let the PTA and main roads, who frankly are not very good at design, they're very good at delivering projects that meet a budget, but they're not very good at design, lead these projects, and then we try and slap away some colour on them or something to try and make them look good at the end. We've got to flip that, and we've actually got to acknowledge that we're building this stuff for generations, and let's do it right. And actually, I mean, I know my community would rather we change the scope of that project in a way that actually delivered something that I think was special. We don't just want to, and I don't think, and I think there are some good examples of that. I think actually interesting, both pedestrian bridges that you've done recently have been good. I mean, they're beautiful structures, but I do worry as we get down the Freo end that they become very utilitarian, and also ones which, and I know you won't like me saying this, but I honestly do think the road movement stuff dominated every other part of that design, and then everything else tries to get bolted on at the end. And of course, and the key bit about it is the PSP. We still don't know where the PSP is going to go, but we had a very clear sense where the road bit was going to go. And I think that kind of thinking is not the right kind of thing. You actually need to properly integrate these things into one really good design outcome, and I guess, yeah.
And I'll contest this, because this is a good time to have a good debate. Because, first of all, I don't think, we've been acknowledged for what we've done on the PSP network. I mean, we've completed the stage 1 of the PSP from Freo to Perth. We're doing stage 2, and of course the new bridge is going to incorporate PSP, and then of course the connectivity into Fremantle is the next part. But that's an ongoing discussion. Well, what I get a bit, I get a bit worried that people just want to confront at the first time. Like, this isn't good enough, it's main roads, engineers, you guys are all evil. I don't believe in that. I don't actually believe in that. No, Brad, let me finish. Okay, so that whole sort of, this is all terrible. And then on the design review, because I make this point, our projects go through a design review process. Now, you're saying, well, we should have all fixed from day one. Well, that never happens. It's an iterative process. People provide comments, we get feedback, and that's what design review is, and that's why we have it. Now, there were some comments made about some of our train stations at the last forum, which I took offence to, and I drove past some of the previous ones that were built, which never went through a design review process.
Yeah.
No one seemed to care then, but but we've got a design review process, and so I just think that sort of Main Roads is a bunch of engineers, they're all awful, is not an approach to take to a community process.
That wasn't what I said. I said you're not very good at design, and I think it's that's just actually true. And unfortunately, what you just described, this review process, is exactly what it should be. But the process you currently got, and this bridge wasn't. I sat in a year with stakeholder groups, where everyone around that room, except for the City of Fremantle, was an engineer from Main Roads or PTA or the ports, and there was nothing iterative about that other than the City of Fremantle saying, please change this, and we'll say, thank you, we'll note that, and nothing happened. That took a year. And the key bit about this as well is that where else, and this is a key transport bit, where else in the network does Main Roads actually say, we don't know where this road goes, it just stops. But that's what we're doing with our PSP. We literally, Main Roads have no design solution to get it. Let me finish. Let me finish now.
As if
you let me finish this time.
PSP, it's just ridiculous. It's ridiculous. I'm sorry.
Okay, well, can you then explain to me where on the south side of the river where the PSP runs?
Well, because we're going through a design process.
No, but you don't. But
we are. We're going through the alliances going through.
Okay.
The idea
Main
that
Roads,
you sit here and
Main
say,
Roads tell me they don't know where it goes. This is your department. It says to me, we don't know where this goes. We don't know whether we're going to need a bridge over Beach Street or they're going to continue on the railway line. They don't know, and they don't. It's not in their budget, and they're not designing it.
So you're saying that we're going to have a dead end?
At the moment, because there is no. Well, okay. So what is the plan for the PSP from that? No, this is the key question.
It's going through a process.
No, okay. Let me just ask you this question.
It's going through a process.
I think PSP, key bit of the transport infrastructure, the bike network. Okay, so which it currently goes, amazing, and I think again, credit where it deserves. It currently runs from Mandurah to Perth, but it doesn't actually get from Fremantle to Perth.
Well,
and
I've only been there for 4 years.
So where though? But there is no planning and no design for how it gets from the southern side of the river into the centre of Freo, and that actually should be done now. And there's no work being done on that.
Well, what's Fremantle been doing?
Asking for that to happen.
Or what have you been doing?
Well, it's your project. It's your project.
No, going to the City of Fremantle, what have you been doing?
We have spent we have had millions of dollars on bike lanes to the point where our residents kind of probably give us a bit of a hard time about how much we're spending on bike lanes.
So we've been doing this bridge design. Why haven't you planned it?
We have. We've given Main Roads options.
You know how it's going to be done then?
No, not because it's your project. All we can do is give you our preference.
Brad, honestly,
preference. Okay, let me give you our ask the question. I'll give you the answer. So the City of Fremantle gave a really clear plan that we wanted to continue on the railway line all the way, and your department said we can't agree to that because we don't have a design. So I'm trying to be really clear here that it's your department needs to understand and actually get their full network planning for that. And
you know how many briefings I've had, and they've all understood the PSP connectivity and they're working on it. The idea, and this is where I get really angry, is that you sit there and say, "Oh, your PSP is going to end in a dead end," as if that would happen, as if we'd spend all that money connecting the PSP from Perth to Fremantle, have it stop on the bridge. It's just not going to happen. So the sensationalists, you guys are just going to leave the PSP to be a dead end, is not going to happen. Okay. It's not going to happen.
All I can say then is I'm really pleased
to
have your assurance, but like I say, all I have before me right now is what Main Roads have said, and the very maps of the bridge, which literally have it running out at a dead end with no plan for it to continue. So all the information I have is, and all the plans that are currently publicly available have it as a dead end. I look forward to what actually says it's not.
Michael Barker, Michael Barker, has sat in on these community events as I have. And would you like to say whether or not you feel confident in Main Roads' design capabilities?
I came to the bridge relatively late. I'm a South Fremantle resident. I'm a lawyer with a 40-year interest in urban planning. But in my postgraduate legal studies in Toronto in the late 70s, when urban environmentalism was big and hadn't quite reached Australia. And the sort of discussion we're having here was being had there. And getting a vision and community consultation, all of the things we still talk about, that came out in the city vision discussions in the 80s. They're all relevant here. So everything that Rita said, Jerry said, that it's great to hear it. What puzzles me about the Fremantle Bridge more than anything is this. It is intractable in many ways. Seaway kind of came along. John Forrest brought the idea. After earlier opposition, they blasted out the bar and they built the port, and it's grown steadily with the figures that Jerry gave. But at the same time, there's been this debate about ports. Where a port should be at Fremantle has been debated since Sterling arrived with his people. Now, the latest suggestions are the port, at least the container port, that part of the commercial port should go south, and Westport's reported on it. And I'm still trying to get my head around where the government stands on it. If I read it properly and don't read between the lines or look for footnotes, there seems to be a commitment. We've got an election which has been conceded. It might be why Ms. Meadows not here tonight.
Could be something to do with it.
That the port will go south. As a person interested in all the big issues talked about here tonight, for me it's vision. I'm not going to be here in 30 years. If I am, I'll be approaching my 101st birthday. So my grandkids are going to be here. And I've often said, if down the track I'm still here, they say to me, Poppy, where were you when this was all going on? Did you say anything about it? I'd like to say yes, I did, and I have. You look at the Leighton area. Already a lot of development. I think that happened some years ago when Lambert Tim was probably looking after all of that, and there was opposition to it. It's happened. Density looks good. There will be debates about further development. There's a whole lot of empty land in that area immediately north of Rails Head where the commercial port is. And it's going to be either a small big city or a big small city, I'm not sure. The opportunity to develop that magnificently is there. There's obviously a port move is going to be a contraction in what happens there. Whatever happens to the port, we'll wait and see. But to me, blind Freddie can see that you wouldn't be finally working out where to put a bridge about what's going to happen. Because all of the points of opposition given by the authorities, by main roads, by Fremantle ports, about where the cars come off, where the other ships have to land, they all seem to me to be rather transient objections. So that's my take on it. And really my question for the Minister is the port going to move? Because if it does, if the government's committed, then it seems to me a lot of consequences flow for urban planning and development in that area.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely good points. A couple of things. First of all, read the traffic bridge. One of the key issues is the ongoing maintenance and safety of the bridge, and we know that's been. I mean, people can debate it, but I've got to, listen to the engineers on that issue, and people can disagree with it. But
no one's debating.
yeah, so there is, in a sense, a need to replace that bridge. In relation to the planning of the entire area, it's a very good question. Now, North Fremantle, for example, there was a group that I've asked David Caddy to head up about the whole planning for North Fremantle in the future, because there's so many different corridors, different reservations and buffers as a result of the port in particular. But that can only get some clarity once a Westport report was handed down. That's been handed down. So the Westport report recommends the moving of the port either through a staged approach or through a sort of in one hit, and that is the work that will now be undertaken, a full business case. I think there's about $97 million allocated in the budget, and that includes the full business case for the new port. It includes all the environmental and other surveys. It also includes the land use planning, or in particular the corridor planning for the road network. And if you look at where we will be heading, a new port in Kwinana, but also, and when you look at the road network, the Tonkin Highway, which goes up to Mewshay, we've got the Gateway project at the moment happening, sorry, not the Gateway, the Tonkin Gap project happening on Tonkin Highway. We're extending that down to Munajong too, so there's a number of that Tonkin Highway, and then the Thomas Anketel sort of corridor. So that plus the rail corridor that would also be built. So that's all the work that's happening now. I think that certainty now allows us to start the future planning for the North Fremantle area, and because in the past we have been impacted by suggestions from the port that they needed a buffer because they needed to potentially expand into the future, and as a result that prohibited us really being able to assess some of the proposals and do some of the work. So that's the plan, is to move the port, and of course then there'll be further work done, hopefully in consultation with the City of Fremantle about the future of that area. You notice that the government's committed to the new film studio down at Victoria Quay. That's part of the bigger vision, and also trying to make sure that we have a plan for that area, which is very exciting. But ultimately, we have to first do the full business case, which would then determine the transition process of that Fremantle port, and that work would be undertaken. Should we be re-elected, and we have about $97 million in the budget to do that work.
So, being pragmatic, I mean, I actually support a working port of Freo. I'll put that, but I'm also pragmatic enough to know that Labor's going to win this election, and their commitment is to move the port. So I think on that basis, I think we can actually, the upside of that, there is some clarity, and I think that is for North Freo especially, that offers a really amazing opportunity, because I think we agree. North Freo has always been in that slightly strange space around how it works, and I think there's a huge opportunity around the North Fremantle train station. As indicated, Michael, just to the south of that is land that we have people already wanting to zone urban rather than industrial. And I think that should be the next properly integrated transit-orientated development and on a heritage line. And you won't get an NIMBY pushback. You might get a little bit, but I don't know, Jerry, maybe you can comment on that. But my sense is that development around that train station of a density is something that would be broadly be supported, especially if it was done well, integrated, potentially, looking at even things like dropping the train line. But there is a huge opportunity. It's an amazing location, right on the beach, next close to Freo, and the North Fremantle Centre. And I think there's a really good opportunity to actually see that as a bit of a... We haven't done a really well-planned TOD properly. I'm trying to think, really since Subi in some ways. I mean, you can look at Wellard and others, but one that's actually been really well delivered and planned. I think there's a really good opportunity here, and it is where we don't have much, there's not too much fragmentation of ownership of land. Yeah. In fact, it's all state government agencies.
And that's right, and that's why we started looking at this a couple of years ago, because there was a lot of demands from people saying we want to redevelop here and there, but it was difficult without the final Westport decision, because that Westport decision now gives clarity to move forward. And so that's, as Brad said, you may not support the Westport decision, but it does give clarity in relation to Freo the port not needing more land to expand, and that's what was prohibiting a lot of those discussions.
Sorry. Jerry, did you have something?
Yeah, so there's a bridge bit as well. That I think, can I just come back to that bit as well? Because that's really important. Because I mean, and this is a really interesting question. I appreciate you've got some constraints around federal funding and that bridge project. But in a perfect world, I agree with Michael. Ideally, you would actually pause that project for a year or two, just while you got some better clarity around some of the environmental approvals needed in Copeland Sound, and actually design that project. Because part of the big constraint was the port literally would not give up a centimetre of land, even though they were moving. There was a whole potential to actually moving the whole bridge project slightly downstream and actually getting a much better outcome was something that I think the community quite rationally was saying, why aren't we looking at this? The port's going. But I appreciate there may be some federal funding constraints around actually doing that, but that's what you would do. In a perfect world.
In a perfect world, you do a lot of things, but we have to deal with the realities of federal government funding and also the fact of the safety and maintenance issues of the bridge. So they're there.
Where the world is now wanting net zero projects everywhere, and all the companies, if they want to get their funding, have to do net zero strategies and show that they mean it. If you want to get your funding or your financing, so. I'd just like to see a quick overview from Rita and Brad about those things together, really, that hydrogen in the regions, electromobility in the cities, and how we proceed in that net zero direction.
Sure. First, do you want to go? Okay.
No.
Okay, so we've announced a number of different strategies, but I'll just start off, first of all, with an announcement from the Minister for Energy, Bill Johnston, about replacing all the diesel-powered energy systems out in regional WA, I think about 1,000, with solar and battery, which I think will actually make a huge difference. And we have a number of Aboriginal communities, as you know, who currently run diesel-powered energy systems, and as a result, the cost, the impact on the climate, on the environment, but also just the logistics makes it very difficult. So we're starting, in a sense, from the regional, in the regional, more isolated areas, and moving in. In relation to, transport and more generally, my view, the best answer is to get more people on mass transit. That's my sort of starting point. Is we do have an electric vehicle strategy, which I'll talk about in a minute, but my view is the more people we get on mass transit, the better, full stop, So that is really what our aim of MetroNet and all that goes into it is all about, is more people on mass transit, less cars on our roads, simple as that. Then there's the issue of buses, and I know there's been a good discussion about electric buses and so forth, and there's been a bit of Twitter activity against me every time I mention anything on anything about electric buses, but we've got buses being made in Dandenong currently through the Volvo Volgren contract, and we hope to have those buses over here by the end of this year, electric buses, and we'll be running them through Joondalup. We're calling it the trial of the Joondalup CAT system, and we hope to then be able to roll that out across the system. But what we're wanting to do, and many know that our buses are pretty much manufactured and assembled in Malaga, is over time transition that from a diesel to electric buses. But we're using the Joondalup CAT system as our first trial, and that's been announced, and the charging infrastructure's being installed at the moment. We've also got the electric vehicle strategy, which is also something that we've released. And of course, with all of these, it's all about the charging infrastructure. It's a lot about the cars, but primarily about the charging infrastructure. And where do you put it? Who pays for it? What is the system? And that's something that we've announced, I think, tens of millions of dollars to roll out EV charging infrastructure across the state. So there's a number of measures, and of course there's the renewable hydrogen strategy that Alan McTiernan's been pushing very hard. There's a number of trial projects throughout regional WA about how we can support renewable hydrogen and also the potential export of that. There's a number of different projects, like I said, that are in the trial phase, and I think that we've got a number of targets. I think by 2022 we want to see the outcome, a number of trials that are being undertaken throughout regional WA in different forms. I know there's a partnership with a number of mining and resource companies as well in relation to vehicles, but more generally how we can support the development of renewable hydrogen in WA. So there's a number of facets of it, but it really is the way of the future. Clean energy is, of course, very much the way of the future. I think one of the interesting things, and I think the White Gum Valley proposal that you're probably going to talk about, that the partnership between Fremantle and Development WA, those sort of initiatives are great, but we need to say how can we make it more affordable to more parts of the community, and I think that's going to be the big challenge, because trials are good and we're trying to do as many of those, but how do you make it practical, and how can you make it more affordable and provide more incentives across for further developments? But even simple things about more diversity of housing supply, I think, helps reduce a bit of that demand as well.
So, I think we're a good place to start. There's lots in this question, Peter. Yeah. So, yes, certainly, I think the electrification of pretty well everything except very long distance transport, which is where hydrogen is coming quickly. Probably much slower to Australia than many parts of the world. We all know the stats where we're seeing huge uptakes of EVs around many parts of the world now, where Australia is still sitting below 1% uptake. So I think we need, as Rita said, we obviously need the infrastructure in place, and there's been some good promises around investment in that. But I also think we need some more immediate incentives around uptake of electric vehicles, and that's simply there are plenty of ways you can do that around. We're seeing other states do it, waiving, for example, registration fees for the first 2 years, and those kinds of things around how do we actually start to see that uptake happen really quickly and end up being mainstreamed. Look, it is going to come quickly, and it's not just at the car level. We're seeing it. An electric bike, kind of the whole micro mobility stuff, I think is an absolute game changer. And I think this is actually where I get really excited, because we've got great weather. I'm I was an early adopter of electric bikes, even when they were dagging just for old people. And now, but they've kind of now actually kind of got. I think they're going really. Mainstream is not quite the right word I'm looking for, but certainly much more widespread. In fact, I was just at an electric bike shop in North Perth before I came here, getting some parts, and they're great, and you're really seeing it kind of take off. But these are the kind of technologies that can change our cities, because you can all of a sudden start to move around in different ways, and I think quite transformative. And then you add that into the mass transit question, which again needs to be electrified. And I've never actually had this discussion with Rita, but I'm not quite sure why we need a trial of electric buses. I feel like they're pretty well proven globally, and we actually just need to get on and roll them out. And this is actually, in fact, with some people in this room, we were in China in 2019, where electric mass transit is just everywhere. Be it electric buses, in fact, autonomous electric buses, or be it trackless trams. It's just. It is the new global standard, and I think this state, and this is one of the things that I would love to start to push if I'm fortunate enough to be in the Parliament, does need some interim targets around moving to net zero emissions. I appreciate the state's got a 2050 target, but can I be bluntly say 2050 means not much to any of us. We actually need some really robust interim targets to work out how we're going to get there, and actually starting to say we're not going to invest in diesel anymore. We're not going to invest in any. We are going to have a really clear transition to this state actually lowering its emissions. It's doable. It saves us money. It actually puts us on into the economy for the 21st century. It just ticks so many boxes, and I think there has been some good cautious steps by this government towards that. I just don't think they're ambitious enough, and I guess that's where I get really excited, because I just feel like WA is so well placed. I mean, and we talk about green hydrogen. I think when you got people like Tweedy Forrest who are going around doing his boy lectures on it, there is a great sense of WA is so well placed. Renewable energy, of course, where I do find it extraordinary that somehow we still lag as a state behind the rest of the country in terms of renewable energy uptake, but we have the best wind and solar, and we do some really good stuff, as Rita mentioned, on the fringe of grid, really good logical stuff. What we at some point need to bite the bullet really hard and say, you know what, we actually need to be transitioning our Swiss, our main grid, much more quickly, and that for me that's the main game, and one I think where this government does need to have greater ambition.
Just on that though, I just want to talk about buses, because ultimately we could, go and buy a few from China and import them tomorrow. We could. But what does it mean for local manufacturing and it's supporting an Australian bus industry and making our, and having a system for the longer term? So, yeah, we could go and buy 500 from China tomorrow, but the charging infrastructure, we have to roll that out. The other thing I want to say is that we want to support the local manufacturing of our buses, and that's why we're going to use our existing contract to do that. And the other issue is the long-term maintenance and total life cycle cost. Because as a government, I don't want to be, as a former minister, driving the streets looking at some of it, some rash, a decision that didn't take into account the long-term impact. So,
EVs, maintenance of EVs is considerably lower of that compared to anyone who knows electric vehicles. That's part of the problem. They have no maintenance. They have no moving parts. So from a maintenance perspective, you can't make that argument. I mean, literally, EVs, one of their great beauty is that they don't have maintenance.
So if I go and buy 500 tomorrow, and just put them on the streets, you're saying to me...
20 to begin with. Forget about the 500. Let's start somewhere.
We are, yeah.
Yeah, so...
We are.
So there is...
They're coming in... Yeah, and that's what they're doing. They're making them in Dandenong at the moment for us. That's what they're doing.
Yeah. So, look, we appreciate heading in the right direction. I guess what I'm saying is actually this is a pretty proven technology now. And I get nervous every time we invest in a new diesel bus or a new, or upgrading, not your decision, but from the Barnett government, upgrading coal-fired power stations that never got turned on again. I mean, that kind of dumb decision that locks us into 20th century kind of technologies. Yeah. I just think we've got to stop that and actually have this really speed up that transition.
And I want some local manufacturing of our buses too.
But you can locally manufacture electric buses.
Yeah, that's what we're doing. That's what we plan to do.
They're not much. They're less complicated, and they're less parts than a diesel bus.
And that's what we plan to do.
Yeah, give them a good kick too. The PTA have been very hard to talk to at all about electric buses. They don't want to change.
Just to acknowledge that what Metronet 2 is doing, because I think people jump to the EVs, but also acknowledge that what Metronet's doing, that is creating a cleaner form of transport for a lot of people. And I think the comment that plebs catch public transport, the concept is that I do believe individual mobility devices will be very, very important for those that live close to their destination, but also close to train stations. So I think it's a combination, and I think we have to acknowledge that if we can get more people on our trains, that is a good thing. That's a very, very good thing, and we're investing in a lot of new stations, up to 18 new stations, new rail lines to get people out of their cars, and I think for longer journeys as well. And I think that's a really positive thing.
Have these new stations got electric recharge for
in the car parks? I think that we're planning to roll those out. The other issue is also from the planning perspective, which is quite an interesting thing, is what the definition of, how they can be rolled out through, for example, petrol stations in a sense too. So the planning system is also another thing we're looking at, is how you encourage the rollout of charging infrastructure through requiring that particular proposals have that charging stations too. So that's something we're doing as well.
Can I just follow on in agreement with what Rita said? I think where we need to get to, and I think is what Metronet does a step towards, is actually it's just about choice, and this comes back to Peter's life work in some ways, is that a good city is not automobile dependent, it's one where you've got choice. Where you got a whole bunch of really good options to move around, and depending on what you need to do that day. And that's the kind of city that we need. And I guess I think we are. I think micro mobility, electric cars, and an electrified public transport system help us to do that in a low carbon way, which can be pretty exciting.
Very good. Sounds almost like the last comment to be made. Have we got any other general questions that you're burning to ask these two politicians?
Thanks.
One down here.
Thank you both for the debate. So you mentioned at the start that there's the ambition to complete the circle route, which I presume you mean from Fremantle to Coburn Central or Fremantle to Murdoch.
Well,
Can you maybe talk a bit more about that, and then make it sort of, in a broader sense, what we can expect from a second-term McGowan government in terms of mid-tier transport? So,
in respect to a second-term McGowan government is the delivery of all the commitments we've made. But of course you have to always look to the future too. And I know there's two live proposals in a sense, Fremantle to Coburn, Fremantle to Murdoch, and they're proposals that will need to be looked at, as well as the other proposals that the federal government's funded, of course, the feasibility into the Scarborough project, and of course there's, in a sense, the other proposals linking, Curtin, UWA. So I think in the future there'll be further work done on that. We're not committing to any of those projects because we're in the process of delivering all the other projects we've committed to. But as we continue to move on, as I said, Metronet Stage 1 is really getting to the, in a sense, completing the radius, sort of starting the circle route. And I think there'll be much more further work done in looking at the options of having that connectivity around and not having to always go into the city to come out, which I think is very important. Some of the bus routes really try and deliver that with some of the circle routes, but it's looking at how we can move people from point to point, node to node in the best way. I do think it is an exciting future, and it's a combination of so many. It's looking at all the different modes of transport, but again, how we continue to make sure that the individual mobility devices, or that last mile, first mile, is something that I'm really attracted to, because I think that is the way of the future. And I think you're just seeing more and more people choose those types of whether it's e-bikes. The technology is just so incredible, and how we can mould that into how we develop our city and the suburbs. And acknowledging also that there's so many different challenges throughout the suburbs and regional WA as well. And so you've got to always be aware of what people in the suburbs in particular need, and how they can connect better to their train stations, and that's something we're really trying to do.
Okay, here.
Just as a comment to start with, Western Australia is the only state where emissions are continuing to rise. The transport sector nationally accounts for about 20% of Australia's emissions. I presume it's about that figure here in Western Australia. Reducing emissions in the transport sector can make a huge contribution to reducing emissions in this state. I'm a pensioner. 18 months ago, I bought an electric vehicle. If I'd bought the petrol version of that vehicle, I could have paid roughly $30,000. I had to pay twice that to buy the electric vehicle, but I had to pay 4 times the stamp duty for it. If I bought the petrol version, it would have cost me about $1,000 in stamp duty. It cost me nearly $4,000. Sorry, $1,000 if I bought the petrol, $4,000 for the electric vehicle. That's a huge disincentive. That's something you could address right now.
But can I just, one of the things I do like is that I think there's a whole bunch of really low-hanging fruit, and I think your stamp duty example is a really good one of those. And I think this is actually things that government, I think, if we're serious about making this transition, the kind of thing we should jump on quickly, because it actually is probably no real cost. Whether someone buys a $30,000 petrol version or $60,000, there's actually no real cost to government, and whether you charge them. So in fact, actually, these are the kind of low-hanging fruit, smart stuff that we can do. They can actually start to speed up. And then when you've got demand, more EVs on the road, you've got demand for more infrastructure. It's a kind of a virtuous cycle. And I guess that's the kind of stuff that I'd love to see us doing that. Because I think you're right, we are making, I think you're right, deserve credit for some really good long-term infrastructure decisions. But I think there is a whole bunch of really important short-term stuff we need to be doing right now that can help us speed up some of these things.
Okay.
Okay, there was someone over here who had a question. No. Okay, no, just behind you, Thomas. Thanks.
Hi, my name's Stephen Kovacs. I'm a PhD candidate at Curtin. Before I was a planner at City of Stirling, and before then I was working under Brad at Frio. So I was pleased to see that both of you acknowledge that we've had a lot of bad or lazy infill with the ensuing loss of tree canopy. And I was also pleased to see that you both seem to acknowledge the importance of precinct planning around, especially around nodes. That being the case, I think my question to both of you is probably how are we going to, I guess, make more use of the train station environment, which at the moment is dominated by car parking. So we're probably talking about 2 or 3 kilometre catchments. And I guess also there's related to that is a question of these PSPs. I'm a recreational and cyclist. I sometimes observe growing conflict between pedestrians and cyclists, and I wonder whether we can see their use by date approaching and whether there's a better approach than PSPs.
Yeah, look, I think the whole sort of regulatory or sort of environment for electric, scooters and bikes is something that hasn't really sort of been considered in a very significant way, and there's starting to be some clashes between the pedestrian and the electric bike or the electric scooter. But I think the rollout of PSPs will continue in their current form, but again, I think we probably have to better look at exactly the role of e-scooters and e-bikes across the entire network, and it's something that I've raised with a few people in relation to how we can make sure that we can not create any disincentives for the use of those personal devices, because I do believe more and more people are turning to them because they're just so handy but also effective in moving from point to point. In relation to the whole cycling infrastructure, there is a number of different programs that Transport run with councils, from sort of the Bike Boulevard concept, which is quite an intensive project, to other projects where we try and work with councils in supporting whether it's dedicated infrastructure or maybe just in line markings or whatever it is to support the network of bike lanes that feed the PSPs. We've had an approach on the PSPs to try and tackle some of the gaps, some of those big gaps that have been many people haven't been using our PSPs, and so the 3 big ones were Fremantle to Perth, which has been one that people have been wanting for a long time. There's been a couple in the northern suburbs along the Mitchell Freeway, which we've completed one key missing gap around Scarborough Beach Road, the overpass. And of course there's the Causeway Bridge too, which is a big new bit of infrastructure. So we've tried to look at from a network point of view, the PSPs, where are those gaps which the cycling community really said this is a massive disincentive, because you have to go there, then you have to go and cross 5 roads to try and get to your destination. So we've had an approach of addressing those gaps, and where we do work with councils, a number of grant programs and so forth, supporting, in a sense, a secondary bike network. More generally though, I think the whole how we manage in the future the increased uptake of electric bikes and electric scooters is something we need to look at, because I think increasingly we're seeing more people use them, and as I said, I think everyone's currently a little bit unaware where they should be, where they can be, so I think that's something that needs to be worked on.
Add to that, actually, I mean, I think one of the really interesting things, so maybe start with bike infrastructure, and funding. Again, think about low-hanging fruit again. There is a weird anomaly in the state, is that if you want main roads for public transport funding for roads, you'll get 2/3 of that road funded as local government, and then the local government only needs to put in 1/3, the state will put in 2/3. But when it comes to cycling infrastructure, they only pay half. Now, those kind of, it's like, makes no sense to me, and these are the kind of things we need to change. We're serious about having a transition that doesn't encourage, literally, because honestly, and in fact, sometimes we find ourselves literally in local governments, and when Fremantle's not alone in this, resealing roads that you think, does that really need resealing? Because you get given money to do it by the state, and it actually having a much more, what I would call a mode agnostic form of funding for roads, which says, you know what, local government, here's your money, you can actually spend that on bike infrastructure, if you really want to resurface your roads, but actually not actually just saying you must constantly overly subsidised road infrastructure and much less for bikes. And the bike infrastructure funding is always so heavily fought after, and it's never enough to go around. And the road, frankly, we get road money thrown at us probably more than we need. So I think it's a really interesting kind of literally around actually resurfacing roads. I mean, I think this is actually, and I think it's one of those, and the fact that government's willing to pay more for that, I find quite, I just think we need to get those kinds of things sorted. And there's some really good bang for buck around nodes, and I would say around schools and local centres around actually bike infrastructure. Because
because our schools is a big one for me, because we're still planning our schools. So in particular the newer suburbs, where we plan our schools and there's always a fight about the car parks. That's the first thing that happens when you build a new school, is there's not enough car park. The drop-off is dangerous. And so a bit of work that I've asked my agency to do is actually, when we actually approve a new school, we actually, how does it interact with the community? Because currently, it's been education gets land for a school, they plan a school, there's a car park, and to me that's a low-hanging fruit. If you can get 50% of your kids walking to a brand new school, and normally these new schools are in new housing suburbs where you have a lot of young kids all around at the same time. So, and I've got an example in my electorate in Brabham where built the school, and then there are so many young families in close proximity, and it's like, if we can encourage from day one that they walk or cycle or scooter to school, you've won them. You know what I mean? We do a lot of retrofit, so we go back to some of the older schools and see how we can make it a bit more cycle friendly. But that's a bit of work we've started actually. So all new schools actually become far more about kids walking or cycling, or and the little kids and scooters, they can go anywhere with them. So it's getting them to go to those schools in that way, and designing the footpath in the suburb. I mean, I've also wanted to create another gap project. I've got so many schools where, again in new suburbs, where the footpath isn't finished because the developer hasn't finished that footpath or done that estate, and as a result you have real big missing gaps, and kids can't go to school safely. So that's more low-hanging fruit, that instead of trying to retrofit or trying to fix an old problem, try and avoid the problem in the first place by making the school very much a bike-friendly, a walking-friendly school. And that's a bit of work that we're doing, which I think would be really good.
Go back to where we started, where we both used to ride to school.
To finish.
You're too far away.
Too far away.
advocating about the health impacts of cycling. So rather than your point, it's low-hanging fruit, but the discussion is around the health impacts of walking and cycling. And then we can quantify those benefits, which can be used in the business case as part of the benefit cost ratio, which I'm not sure we are doing it here. But in last 1 year, the business cases of cycling is much better as compared to road, and that wasn't the case 2 years back. So that conversation has moved significantly, and COVID has made a bigger impact.
Absolutely.
In London specifically.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
health benefits are
I'm going to take that as a comment.
Sorry, I just want to say one of the issues we've had is with Infrastructure Australia about determining wider benefits of our projects, and so we struggle a little bit in getting into because IA is currently very narrow in determining in its benefit cost ratio, and I do agree, and this is why for schools in particular, it's just the overall health and safety of the children. Just walking, cycling, and that's why, I mean, we've seen, I think there's across the network about a 20% increase in cycling over the past couple of years. Infrastructure Australia's got the transport benefit and then wider economic benefit, and they don't use that normally in the determination of their BCR, but we've tried to move that debate a bit.
We hope that you can lift your vision a little bit more on the hydrogen economy to look beyond transport into something like that and what it can do for Western Australia.
I know there is a hydrogen strategy that Minister McTiernan and the Premier released, and that does look at, as I said, a staged view of the future, and in particular undertaking a number of feasibility studies that are being undertaken right now over a number of different projects. So there are many people in government who are pushing that. Like I said, I'm more the transport person, but Alana in particular has been pushing that very hard.
The Minister does have to go, and I think it's fantastic that we've had 2 hours of the Minister and Brad, and I think some very honest approaches to the issues, and really committed to try and pursue some of the issues that we're finding difficult. So we look forward to the next 4 years of you being in charge of transport.
We've got to win first.